right, well,
They've been getting low.
I wish they'd go ahead and fall in, that way they might fix it, make this,
You know, it is,
it what?
it's getting worse.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I can tell.
You know, something's washing out. You know,
That's what happened.
Now, the second attempt, that hole, I think, is maintained, but the very first
You know, when you turn right along, open the ball. Whenever the traffic, y'all notice the person driving.
Johnny, did water get in the building yesterday?
Did what?
Water get in the building yesterday? Friday, I'm off the floor first hour.
No, someone did a great job.
That was me.
Yeah.
That's me.
I heard you were on the
I've got
back.
that master's degree, so I can run work on my.
Right back.
And
But now they were out there working on those
pumps, Gary.
pumps all, 2 or 3 times.
That ground's higher than the building. Well, actually, you just shot back. I didn't even.
But no, none came in. At least
Well,
one
it must be working. It's really faint. I got about 5.
We had a total, I looked this morning, total since, yes, which is probably the most in that short of window of time.
Well, I just don't understand that time that you all were here. I don't know. 2010 was bypass. You couldn't get, and had to have rained. I think it was just more intense for a shorter period of time that day.
See if I can meet with the next,
Uh-oh.
you gotta work something.
On his tree?
Yeah, just, man, that's what. That's not a lot of water. That's kind of mud.
I know, when I went and got that fertilizer that day, it wasn't even wet, but it was still mushy back there.
Another trend.
Back.
Well, it's true.
Well, that tree in the front is, you saw the limbs this morning. Those, well, there's a big stack of limbs up front, and that's just from first. Saying also a few, but some of them are very important.
Right.
It's just. It's just, and that old tree's down there, and I don't, just don't. Well,
Yeah, that little park down.
that fell. There's, the Kimbrels had one huge, built right beside their house. Right between the two houses, fell straight toward the tree, straight.
Where do they live?
You were generally.
Yeah, that's it.
Just in that general area.
Okay. Well, it's more like rugby, that second game. Yeah, but I watched it.
What's it?
I mean, I'm not a Duke fan, but I like them this year because I like that kid that, foul, that last foul they called on him. I mean, they abusing that boys inside and he didn't touch that kid. I just don't understand how they call a touch foul, a shot. And he just root out. Yeah, I know. And that's Florida, they gave him more than me that way. Those guys, all they play.
Florida game, they just,
I just don't understand it.
And then call red foul.
Well, you know, when you
that.
open
I
that
hate it.
door, you just don't quite know where it comes from.
Right.
Make a split decision.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, the replay of the Auburn game where Bruce didn't play out, but the guy, other center was holding the guy around the
I know,
leg.
I know.
And they watched the
That's not
replay and they said, oh, there's nothing there.
But you can't, they call the foul on the other part, so you can't.
Trying to get that straight.
Don't see replay forward.
I don't think.
I mean, 'cause it was, that was
No, I agree, I agree.
shoves in the back.
That's been announced at WBPJ over.
Yeah, yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. I like the other thing. So, I went
The
to
next song.
feel good.
Well,
Florida.
Yeah. I was frustrated.
Good morning. Last time I talked a couple weeks ago, let everybody fellowship a little bit, and then we were running close. Hit the rush at the end. So today, start on time. Welcome. And these next 2 weeks, we're going to do chapter 9 of Acts. And I get a really fun part. You'll know this one pretty well when we get into it. Conversion of Saul, usually or Paul. It's called the headings in our Bibles. And we'll just go ahead and start with some review slides. A little bit of introduction to Saul. We know a lot about him, but I have at least a summary slide. Just talk about the story. See what we come up with. I always like to start here, drawing on Michael Heiser's book, The Unseen Realm, Deuteronomy Worldview. This is from the Song of Moses. You can see it. Kind of TV over a little bit. I tend to sit over there. I hope you can see it glare and stuff. But typically we have a slide, I think Scott showed it last week, 3 rebellions, the Garden of Eden, rebellion of the sons of God, created divine imagers in chapter 6 of Genesis. And then Tower of Babel in chapter 11. Just before the Tower of Babel chapter, in chapter 11, chapter 10 of Genesis mentions about 70 different nations. And God's, after Tower of Babel, says, I'm done with you. I'm going to have other divine beings rule over you. I'm going to create a new nation through Jacob, or through Abraham. Jacob will be my portion. And the rest of the Old Testament is the story of these nations, the rebellious gods over them, miniature gods, lowercase gods, and then Yahweh and his people in Israel. Then Jesus comes to the rescue, and written by Luke, predecessor to our book, Acts, and I've highlighted a key phrase here. Jesus says to his apostles, this is after his ascension, or not his ascension, his resurrection, which we celebrate today, the first day. Repentance and forgiveness of sin should be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. They're going to go forward, reclaim these nations, and this is underscored again in Acts chapter 1, verse 8b, witnessing. These are witnesses, and Jewish law places a lot of emphasis on accurate witnessing. And we start in Jerusalem, Judea, Galilee is involved, but the last week or two we've been in Samaria. And Samaria would have been the northern kingdom, when the kingdom was divided, kingdom that turned to apostasy very early under Jeroboam and never got it right, eventually deported a lot of the people from that area, deported by the Assyrian Empire. But you got this phrase here, to the ends of the earth. The ends of the earth go well beyond this map. As far as the people of this time knew was Tarshish in Spain, and that's where Paul eventually wanted to go. He was deliberately going through these nations and carrying the good news of Jesus. So it starts on the day of Pentecost. It continues. When we finish up this section of this class in May, we will only get maybe a little bit up into here. We will stop for first missionary journey of Paul and Barnabas. But this story, this mission is part of everything we look at in Acts. And it's involved today, not deliberately. There's going to be some action down in here, but let me see if I can pointer. No, I'm not going to do that. I'll advance the slide. Damascus up here is originally part of the land promised to God's people, or at least It's mentioned as part of their inheritance. There's a couple of passages, Numbers 34, and in Ezekiel, as he's having his temple vision at the end of Ezekiel, the last 9 chapters of Ezekiel, Ezekiel 47 makes this very clear. So Damascus is part of this. Damascus is land that David trod. Solomon would have had sovereignty over at the time when the kingdom was at its greatest height. So Damascus is deliberately part of our story today, unintentionally being via Saul. So far in our class, just a quick summary. That obviously the day of Pentecost. And then Peter and John before the Sanhedrin, after they killed a man, looked at the deaths of Ananias and Sapphira. Chapter 5, the Sanhedrin's arresting and beating, and it just says apostles. So I think we can assume most, maybe not all, maybe all the apostles are involved there, even though they're not mentioned again after Acts 1. They're at least part of the story through Acts chapter 5. They come back. It's not just Peter and John. They're not mentioned by name. Later, James will be mentioned. John will be mentioned no more. Peter will be part of our story these next few weeks. But they're doing this work of witnessing. It's just not recorded by Luke. We had in Acts 6 the appointment of 7 men to serve the Grecian Jewish widows. And we see the alluded to at least divisions between Hellenistic Grecian Jews, part of the diaspora, and those who remained in Judea. Talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The martyrdom of Stephen, this is an illustration, I think it's AI generated, of Stephen before the Sanhedrin. Then Philip, if Stephen's death, we're going to look at, review some verses at the beginning of chapter 8. There's a exodus of some disciples. Philip, one of the 7. Stephen, another one of the 7 servants. Philip goes to Samaria. We looked at that 2 weeks ago. Last week, Philip baptizing, explaining Isaiah 53 to the Ethiopian eunuch. So the Ethiopia is now what would have been considered Ethiopia then as part of this reclaiming of the nations. And Saul appeared at the end of Stephen's defense, then his martyrdom. We were introduced to Saul, and we find out that he agreed completely with killing him. This illustration shows people, they're basically taking off their outer garments, putting them at Saul's feet. This is work. It's very physical work, and this is one illustration. It's probably not how it really happened. There's this idea of him being cast into a pit and stoned from above, but it's an effective illustration. And then here, the following verse mentions a great persecution. People began to scatter. This is where Samaria is mentioned. That will be a center point of the first part of chapter 8. But we find out a little bit more information about Saul, trying to destroy the church, basically going from house to house, looking for people, men and women following the way, having them put in prison. We'll elaborate on these points in just a bit. I want to go over some information about Saul, background info, then we'll get into chapter 9. And then have some of you read, hopefully get a little bit of discussion. And Saul is going to say at various points in his letters and also in his conversion story, which will appear a couple more times in Acts. We're going to draw from Acts 22 and Acts 26 a bit as he tells more about his background. But his Roman citizenship will be a big deal later in our story. And I don't know how it happened, but it's part of his lineage. And Tarsus is a very large city, sizable Jewish population. Cilicia, which will be mentioned later. His father, probably Pharisee, synagogue leader. This all comes by his religious heritage very not naturally. Saul or Shaul is his Hebrew name. There's a Latin word, Paulus, for which we would get Paul. That would be probably his Greco-Roman name. Probably had multiple names you see in the Roman world. But I think the transition to Paul might be partly explained by his first missionary journey and he and Barnabas going to the Gentiles. Pharisees, I'm learning as we go. We know of Paul as a tent maker. Well, that was expected. You don't just do the learning, the memorizing that Pharisees do. You don't do the memorizing that maybe a disciple would do, following a rabbi. You have a trade. And I think this is interesting because Gamaliel, Paul's specific wise teacher, And he says, learning of every kind accompanied by a trade ends in nothing. Actually, this quotation continues with discussing sin, but it's important that you know a trade as well as know the oral and written Torah. So Paul, I want you to think of him. I use the word hybrid for lack of a better word, but he's really seems to be more and more a man between two worlds. He inhabits multiple worlds. And so as a Jew, he is part of the diaspora, a Grecian Jew, but he's spending his formative years in Jerusalem, maybe at the age of 12, 13, we don't know, but he goes to Jerusalem to study. And he can call Jerusalem his home, studying under Gamaliel. So he's a mix of both. He's very centered in his early years growing up in Tarsus, but then spending a lot of time in Jerusalem. So I think he really inhabits both of these Jewish worlds. And Acts 22, as he's speaking in Jerusalem around the time when he's arrested, I am a Jew born in Tarsus in Cilicia, but brought up in this city. So he wants to make that clear to his audience. Educated with strictness, and that's another way of saying exactness, precision, under Gamaliel, according to the law of our ancestors. And I was zealous for God. Just leave it there. I want to mention this point that's interesting to me, that the Grecian Jews, Hellenistic Jews, unless they are people of means, they're not traveling to Jerusalem for the festival. So their life is centered around the synagogue. And Judean Jews, you have a mixture of temple and synagogue, but if you're in Jerusalem, particularly Jewish leadership, temple, that's a big deal to them. So you got two different types of emphases. It's interesting to me to learn more about the synagogues. You got different teachers. A lot of Pharisees are over synagogues, rabbis, but they have different interpretations. The written Torah, which is our first 5 books of the Old Testament, but also the oral Torah, which has equal weight to the Jews of this day. And so they're very much like our denominational sects of Christianity, very divided. So you have the Hellenistic or Grecian synagogue in Jerusalem, where Stephen runs into deep controversy. That synagogue, I think, may come up again later in our story in chapter 9. So, chapters 1, verses 1 and 2. We'll get some readers in just a minute. I'll read one more thing. We'll get some volunteers. So, this is immediately after Acts 8, Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. Saul comes back. If we're reading it for the first time, we might have wondered where Saul went. Well, now he's back. Big way. Meanwhile, Saul, still breathing out threats to murder the Lord's disciples, went to the high priest, who would have been Caiaphas here, and requested letters from him to synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any who belonged to the way, either men or women, bring them as prisoners to Jerusalem. I think it's interesting we have this emphasis on both men and women targeted. He's targeting everybody. And then,
that seems to indicate members of the way were still active.
yes, it does. I think it suggests that because I think they're, lack of a better phrase, we call them Messianic Jews. I mean, they're following Jesus, but they haven't left their Jewish behind. That's where they're also would be hopefully trying to reach out to others. And if we would assume fellowshipping, we don't know how they're working within their, lack of a better phrase, early in the morning, house churches. They're probably meeting together, but also meeting in the synagogue. And also, that was Paul's practice. Mike, do you have any?
Yeah, that would also indicate that Saul had other people with him, because Damascus is a long way off,
Yes.
and so he would have to have a band of soldiers or somebody with him to be able to accomplish it.
One thing, and let's build on that. This next, I think, connects. Someone's texting me. Family member. Oh, this is great. This life group text. I'm a hidden member of the life group texting. Unlike Dave, I don't come in with humor. I did send in a random text that was supposed to go to the group. That was an embarrassing moment. But also led to a funny comment by you that I'll never forget. All right, so like anticipating where we're going, Paul does have help. He's a he's an academic Jew, okay? This is a guy, he's a trained Pharisee. He's not going to get his hands dirty. He's going to point out targeted. He's going to be involved in their apprehension, their eventual fates. He's not personally doing, if you will, the actual executing, arresting, etc. This is a description when he's appearing before Agrippa of his methods, if you will, and also his motives. I myself was convinced that it was necessary. Let me stop a second here. All of our Old New Testament passages are from the Net or New English Translation. We will use the Legacy Standard Bible, one Old Testament. Just want to mention that translation. Let you know where we're coming from. I myself was convinced that it was necessary to do many things hostile to the name of Jesus the Nazarene. That is what I did in Jerusalem. Not only did I lock up many of the saints in prisons by the authority I received from the chief priests, but I also cast my vote against them. They were sentenced to death. I punished them often in all the synagogues and tried to force them to blaspheme. Because I was so furiously enraged at them, I went to persecute them even in foreign cities. At last is probably a reference to this trip to Damascus we're going to read about. So, he's got men with him at Damascus, may have been Jewish soldiers. We don't know anything about them, except there was, he has some people accompanying him. Anything that details that strike, but particularly from the second passage from Acts. It's not just Stephen. Stephen's recorded. There's others, apparently. I think there's that's a good question. There's Roman law. I think in the case, I don't know all the details here of the Jewish law as far as, their own issues, because I know the Romans left them alone some things. I would think if they'd gone through a process of a hearing and a vote, I think this is something you can vote check on. But in the case of Stephen, it was done so suddenly, it was much more like a lynching, like just happened in the moment instead of a deliberation. So, Paul even says, I cast my vote. So there was something formally done. The Greek hearings, which I don't know if they borrowed from, I'm not thinking Judean Jews. I would think the Sanhedrin would want to borrow in Greek practices, but you would have white and black doubles. Depending on white for instance, black condemnation. They had some kind of voting system. Maybe they just did hands.
Second, kind of Joey. Trying to wasn't would give them a benefit of the doubt or right.
Well, that's a very loaded word. We don't know all that means there, but Stephen outraged the Sanhedrin by quoting from the Samaritan pit. He did a lot of things that got him in trouble. Then seeing Jesus at the right hand of God was the clincher sentence, if you will. So we don't know, Paul's trying to get him to say something that would go against his interpretation, written, oral, particularly the oral Torah. And Tom Bradford has an app called Torah Studies that we use. Mentioned what happened to Thou Shalt Not Kill. Got that. Seems like that's been forgotten before. It was forgotten later as well. Among, in Christendom, when there's divisions and persecutions and force fall. I think this is just part of Satan working through these divisions. These are different interpretations, and these are matters of life and death. I didn't know about this till we were studying for this particular class, but you had two great rabbis. Boy, if I remember their names, Hillel and Shammai, I think. Two different camps. These are men who were older men who would have been alive probably when Jesus came to the temple at the age of 12. Perhaps they were there when and talking to him. But later, I think this is reported by Josephus, let's say in the 50s AD, there's a dispute between them that gets to the point where the one group attacks the other. I think it's the Hillel people attacked by the Shemite. Some of them were killed. So this is going on. Saul's part of this type of environment where blasphemy, different interpretations, be subject to death. you will, a certain party line here. Obviously, he's to go, yeah, go ahead.
You have to know in the law, punishment for blasphemy.
I think, in the case of Stephen, this is death, yeah. And I think you've got some, I guess there's some Leviticus, I think, it's interesting to me, we read through Leviticus, we read through the law given to Moses, they're not following a lot of it. I have any evidence of them ever having a Jubilee. They never have a full Passover according to regulations till the last king of Judah, which would have been Josiah. But I think there's rules about if someone blasphemes, there's witnesses, like if you crystal blaspheme, be responsible. Actually, I think Mike and so crystal be responsible for taking care of that. I mean, you got those prohibitions. I think that would have been considered a death penalty, following,
So,
depending on what the nature of the blasphemy.
so if they could convict it of blasphemy, then they would be under the law to give them a sentence of death.
I think so. Good points.
My understanding is that the Roman authorities left religious matters to Jews, as long as nobody involved was a Roman citizen. Then part of when it came to intramural matters, among the Jews, especially with the ones who tried to play nice with Rome, gave them a lot of leeway.
So, Scott's on his way to do some traveling abroad and here, and so he and Shannon are here, but I think they went to see second 2 episodes or maybe 3 of Chosen this season, the last week of Jesus. And the first 2 episodes, some of us saw that a week or so ago, and it ends with Jesus violent, 35-acre section court the Gentiles can gather. So it was big, and that's the moment where I think Jewish leaders and Roman leaders took notice. Even scholars who don't believe in Jesus as being, if they believe in him as being real, him being the Son of God, talk about skeptical scholars here, they believe that led to a crucifixion. Appreciate your comment there. Jews are, Romans treat the Jews lightly. They see them as volatile, very different people, alien to the Roman sensibilities. This one God, exclusive monotheism. Romans have a marketplace of religions. You can pick whatever you want. As long as you honor the emperor, you're good. That's all they require. Peace of the gods is required in honoring the emperor. They even give the Jews a different way of paying homage to Caesar, requires violent conscience. Jews get some treatment. We're going to hopefully, at the end of our last slide, see the first time where the Jews are targeted. We have time to get into that. Good comments? Let's see. Yes. The N.T. Wright's commentary on Acts, I'm a historian, we cite our sources. I can't help citing my sources. I found out something that struck me. I want to go with it. Because I think we can tell Saul is a very zealous man. He's all in. But he's also a man, he's steeped in the scriptures, the oral traditions, he knows it all. And he's a man who's a meditative individual. He spends time, meditation, word, meditating on Yahweh. And so as he's preparing for this important mission, the mission is going to Damascus. Question is, did he meditate? Probably he did. He's drawing on God's strength. He is a zealous man doing God's will. Thanks. And so during this time, this would have been the Second Temple period, and going into Saul's day, it was typical for Jews, meditative Jews, to meditate a certain section, a certain passage in Scripture. That's where I want us to go. This gets us to Ezekiel. And Ezekiel's one of those books we kind of shy from, except Valley of the Dry Bones. But also Ezekiel chapter 1. This is what Jews wanted to visualize this passage and have this kind of experience that Ezekiel had. So you got this four-headed creature. This is a close-up. Got some illustrations of what Saul might have been meditating about. It's interesting to speculate about because he's going to see, we know a little bit about his vision. We're going to read about it, but he's going to get a vision, or he's going to get God's going to appear to him, but it's not the way Paul's expecting. Saul's expecting. This is another artist's interpretation because this account carries over to Ezekiel 3, as Ezekiel's commissioned as a prophet, and he's eating the scroll, but it gives us a close-up of creatures as well as the wheels, eyes on. We have a volunteer to read this passage.
Now above the expanse that was over their heads, there was something in the likeness of, like sapphire stone and appearance, likeness of the throne high out was the likeness of one with the appearance of a man. Then I saw from the appearance of his loins something like the appearance of fire all around. From the appearance of his loins and countenance I saw something. There was a radiance around him. As the appearance of a rainbow and cloud day, so was the appearance of the radiance around him. Such was the appearance of the light glory of God. I saw this, fell on my face, the sound.
Fell on his face. I think that's an interesting point here. And we've mentioned, this is a point that I learned from Michael Heiser's book, but the rabbis believed in their interpretations of God's interactions with Scripture. There's a visible Yahweh and an invisible Yahweh. Visible Yahweh be Jesus. They quit teaching that once Jesus in the way. The story we're reading about in Acts became a threat to Judaism. Did that just clamp down on? This would have been Ezekiel's vision. This is just one illustration of what it might have looked like. We can't capture the moment. I don't think even with our imaginations, even with artistic ability. Just be thinking about that. Saul's meditating. This is a common thing that devout Jews are meditating about. This scene from the Old Testament, missioning of Ezekiel, first of his visions. Then we have this story. We have another volunteer.
As he was going along, approaching Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him, fell to the ground, and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting? So he said, Who are you, Lord? He replied, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But stand up and enter the city, and you will be told what you must do. Now the men who were traveling with him stood there speechless, because they heard the voice, but saw no one. So Saul got up from the ground, but although his eyes were open, he could see nothing. Leading him by the hand, his companions brought him to Damascus. For 3 days he could not see, and he neither ate nor drank.
Okay, thanks. Now, anything for the story thing in this particular section? Comment, structure,
This is probably, I was reading this yesterday. I wonder why they say, who are you?
And one commentator said it's probably better, but when I looked at the Greek interlinear, just checked it online, it does translate as Lord. And I heard one commentator say it's better maybe saying sir, like showing respect. But yeah, the way it's written by Luke, when in Greek it is Lord. That may have been said. He knew it was an authority, he may have been reacting that way, not quite. Yeah. Good question. That's not a stupid question.
Good.
I had a friend, used to teach Freed Hardeman. This goes just for Freed Hardeman students, not Campbell Street, Mount Bible students. He would say that there was no questions. That's a joke for me and Derek. Anyway, so there are men with him. Commonly, the illustrations show these men on horseback. I think they're probably walking, just the way we tend to visualize the story. You could fall down. I heard a preacher say this. It struck me as funny. I was about like 15, but he talked about you don't have to be on a horse to fall down. That's true. What do you think about this? Let's talk about it a moment or so. That is Saul's persecuting.
You know, it points back to the section of scripture that said, Lord, at least God, Jesus sees his.
Glad you brought that verse.
Well, I made my comments about people come. I didn't like the connection here. Here it says
sight. Paul loses his. Later, we're going to hear this. We'll see about if scales falling. It's, there's no reason for us not to think that there's something physical that's obstructing his sight. Yes, something happened. But
It doesn't say that Jesus, he saw, it says he saw light.
yeah,
This does say those heard the voice. Doesn't say they heard indistinct.
yeah.
But it does say they did.
And I don't know about what these men are hearing. Paul's conversed multiple languages, and I think Jesus probably was conversant in Koine Greek as well. I've read accounts that persuasively argue that. This is a Hebrew or Aramaic conversation. Men with him, if they're Jewish, if it's communicated that way, there's no reason to say they would. Well, whereas we have other indications where God is speaking, and only person to whom he's speaking, this happens a couple times to Jesus. Only Jesus hears the exact words.
It's interesting because it says about his companions that they saw no, which kind of implies
That's possible. Yeah, we can look at it in different ways. Yes.
First, Paul thought he was all gung ho, I'm doing God's. He's on his way, light from heaven comes down. He's probably thinking, I'm going to get an attaboy. You know? And instead, it's like, why are you persecuted?
That's why I thought N.T. Wright's speculation. It's just speculation. We don't know. The idea that Paul is expecting God to appear, he's hoping for that. It's not what he expected. I want to build on those points. Let's see where we are here. Okay. We're introduced. They're in Damascus. This is a different Ananias, apparently a common name. We had an earlier Ananias, but this is a different guy altogether. We have another volunteer. Verses.
Now there was a disciple in Damascus named Ananias. The Lord said to him in a vision, Ananias, he replied, Here I am. Then the Lord told him, Get up, go to the street called Straight, and to Judas' house, for a man named Tarsus. He is praying. He has seen in a vision a man named Ananias come in and place his hand so that he can see it. But Ananias replied, Lord, I heard many people about this man, how much harm he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. And here he has authority from the chief priest, prison, all calling. The Lord said to him, Go, because this man is my chosen, carry my name for Gentiles, kings, people, for I will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name.
This is Ananias, I'm guessing, is a Jew in Damascus who's now following the way. We also, because of the fleeing of Jerusalem, Saul has caused to flee. Some of them have gone to Damascus. So we can assume those are the people Saul's after. Ananias as well, he can apprehend him. But Jesus spells out a lot of things to Ananias about Paul being chosen and what Paul is going to do. And we're going to see some other verses that explain this point further. I just want to ask a question, see what you guys think. No right or wrong answer here. Why do you think Saul has been chosen? Definitely been chosen. Just like Ezekiel was chosen. Jeremiah. Abraham. There's a sense, we come to God on our own volition. I believe that. We're not more theologians, Calvinists. There is a sense of chosen.
said later that what he did was seeking God with what he thought was right.
I like how your comments make me think of different things. There's John Mark Hicks, who's Lipscomb, and he has a commentary on Chronicles. Very difficult 2 books, but he said the message of that book was that whole scroll is God seek. He's wanting us to seek him. He seeks. So you have that point. Other comments about why Paul chose or Saul?
Well, I was going to comment on the nature of God, because instead of being authoritative, just giving command, he tells him to go, but he gives him the reason why.
questions. There's some examples of skepticism. That's why Mary has her questions. Ananias' question is different because Jesus is directing him to go to someone who's an enemy of the way. So his question is a natural question. So it's being explained to him. And Ananias has to be thoroughly surprised. First, he's going to go to Saul. And second, Saul's going to be commissioned. Then the rock is in the world. But
I don't think he was just surprised. I think he was scared to death.
yeah, he's scared, but also what? So but Ananias, as we see, is going to do exactly what he's commissioned. He's chosen. So we have two people chosen.
Obviously chosen because he was Jewish, chosen Pharisee, inside. You know, we always think of Paul in terms of God's apostle, Gentiles. Tells us that I'm going to carry my name for Gentiles, kings, and people of Israel. We always went first synagogue.
Yeah.
Then the synagogue. He knew the story of God, and he was able to take
Again, that slide I showed you how Paul inhabits the Hellenistic Jewish world, the Judean Jewish world, the Greek and Roman world, Jewish world. He's equipped there, but also this is the chief persecutor way. And then how ironic, if someone's going to go to the Gentiles, which Jew is going to take this step? Obviously, Peter's going to take the step. We're going to explore that in a couple of weeks. Derek will have back-to-back lessons in Acts 10. It's Paul who's going to be considered the apostle of Gentiles. Who better than this main persecutor? Also, this Pharisee of Pharisees. So,
Well, he talks, I can't remember the verse, but I mean, he uses that in one of his letters to show the extent of God's grace and forgiveness. Worst of the worst, what I did, killing Christians. God can save.
yes. There's all kinds of, God's grace is multi-layered, his purposes. There's all kinds of things possibly going on here.
What is fascinating how it first century, in this case, take a vision, he's awake, he's seeing, he's not trans so much, it's a waking dream. Many different communications are described anytime, not communication.
John's comment makes me think about exploring the word vision. So I'm thinking about the supernatural world coming into the natural world via this particular right word would be here. Approach, delivery. Anyway, good stuff. I'll try to get through this section. We got about 13 verses to go. And we're going to do two back-to-back. This is first from Acts 9, but then also chapter 22. Paul again speaking in Jerusalem for an audience, I think, of Pharisees and Sadducees shortly after he's been arrested. And we'll see different accounts, what happens between him and Ananias. We'll just bring them both down. This is Ananias and Saul together.
So Ananias, Mark, now, placed him, so said, sent AC, easily sent like scale, see, got that, man named Ananias, about came beside said, first off, regain your sight, and then just talk. He said, God of our ancestors has already chosen now to seek righteous now. You will be his witness. Now, what are you waiting? Get up, be baptized.
I love the Acts 22. It's my favorite count this, or this particular detail, Paul's version. Ananias says to him, and Ananias has been commissioned by Jesus. He's like, this man's persecuting the way. He's after me. And then he calls him Brother Saul. So I think it's very telling. But Ananias, well, God's Spirit working through him, working through both men. Now, what happens next is a bit in dispute, blurry, if you will, because we know there's a 3-year period. Paul's in Damascus, goes to Arabia. It's not Saudi Arabia, but it's considered Arabia. We'll get to that in just a minute. And he's back in Damascus, then he escapes and he goes to Jerusalem. Oh, there's about a 3-year period. Paul even says 3 years. We don't know the sequence of events, and some people say he speaks in Damascus, creates a bit of an uproar, goes to Arabia, comes back to Damascus again, speaks, and then has to flee for his life. One of my colleagues, Fred Hardiman, has a blog, and he was saying maybe there were 2 escapes through the walls of Damascus. I'm going to present a little differently. I'm not a Bible scholar. I'm just a student like you guys, but it makes more sense to me chronologically that Paul is, all this happens, and then he goes to commune, maybe to do some early preaching in Arabia, then comes back. So we're going to go through this idea of Paul being in Arabia right now. Again, we don't know, because Luke, the way Luke presents it, he leaves out details that are filled in by Paul later. This is at the opening of Galatians. I'll read this. This is from verses 11 through 17. And part of what Paul's doing in Galatians, we'll get back to another section, is he's trying to show his identity separate from the other apostles. And also, his calling is so different. Now, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel I preached is not of human origin. For I did not receive it or learn it from any human source. Instead, I received it by a revelation of Jesus Christ. And I wonder here, is he just talking about the road to Damascus, or is something further going on in Arabia? You don't know. Clearly, this is a formative period for Paul. For you have heard of my former life in Judaism, how I was savagely persecuting the church of God, trying to destroy it. I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries in my nation. I was extremely zealous for the traditions of my ancestors. But when the one who set me apart from birth and called, by his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son in me so that I could preach him among the Gentiles, I did not go to ask advice from any human being, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to see those who were apostles before me. Right away, I departed to Arabia, and then returned to Damascus. To me, at least, this sounds like it's an immediate departure to Arabia, and the revelation may be involved. I don't know. It's hard for us to know. This happens. We're going to see some more events in Damascus. But a lot of striking. I wish we had time to talk more about it. Set me apart from birth. We have similar language. God addresses Jeremiah, like I chose you in your mother's womb. So I don't know if it's a reference like that, but makes it clear I didn't seek any advice. He's not talking to the disciples in Damascus. He's not going to Jerusalem. He's going to Arabia. And then this reference to revelation from Jesus Christ directly.
Can you speculate what he received when he received the Spirit? The revelation at the end.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's being communicated to him, and he's an apostle. And the thing about apostles, they have special role as messengers. Also, their relationship with their rabbi. Somehow, Paul has something that's not unequal to that. He wasn't with Jesus in his tabernacle as he's fellowshipping with his fellow humans, but it's a different commissioning and a different revelation of Jesus. But yeah, I think that definitely the Holy Spirit's involved. This is the Nabatean kingdom, which you can see encompasses the Sinai Desert. Some of you got to go on a trip a couple years ago. Petra, famous site, associated with Aretas IV, who's going to pop up in our reading in just a moment. And there'll be a point where this kingdom apparently encompasses Damascus for a while. Basically surrounds Judea, Galilee. And this is where Paul went. His spent time. We don't know a lot about it. Now we know he comes back to Damascus. We're going to have back-to-back verses. But work through this. We have another brief.
For several days, he was with the disciples in Damascus. Immediately, he began to proclaim Jesus in the synagogue, saying, "This is the Son of God." All who heard him were amazed, saying, "Is this not the man who is ravaging those who call this name, and who had come here to bring them as prisoners